Have you ever thought that your past could determine your future? Or maybe you've ever felt as if you were too marked by your mistakes, as if you couldn't escape who you were. But what if I told you that some of the most important people in the history of faith came from backgrounds far from perfection? What if these people, whose lives seemed defined by the darkness of their past decisions, became the protagonists of a story that would change the world? This is the case of some women in the genealogy of Jesus, whose stories show us that God doesn't stop at a person's past but can use even the darkest situations to bring about his redemption. These women were not typical figures in the biblical story, but their faith and courage made it possible for God's divine salvation plan to unfold. Throughout generations, God chose women whose lives, by human standards, were not what one would expect from a royal lineage, yet they are part of the line of the King of Kings. The first woman mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus is Tamar. Her story, although tragic in many ways, reveals the deep value of justice and courage in the face of adversity. Tamar was not an Israelite. She was a Canaanite woman who, through her union with Judah, became a crucial character in the story of redemption. When Tamar married Er, Judah's son, she never imagined that tragedy would strike so soon. Er died without leaving her children, and according to the Levitical law, Er's brother, Onan, was supposed to marry her to provide offspring. However, Onan refused to fulfill this duty. Instead, he preferred to prevent Tamar from having children who could take away his share of the inheritance. This angered God, and Onan also died. Judah, concerned about the situation, promised Tamar that he would give her his third son in marriage, but he never kept his word. Desperate, Tamar made a bold decision. Disguised as a prostitute, she sat along the road where she knew Judah would pass. When he saw her, he didn't recognize her and unknowingly approached her. The result of this encounter was the conception of twins, Perez and Zerah. Through this brave and defiant act, Tamar not only claimed her right to offspring but, inexplicably, became part of the Messiah's genealogy. Tamar's act shows that, although the society of her time considered her a despicable woman, God used her to fulfill his plan. Through her bravery and determination to fight for what was just, Tamar played a crucial role in the story of redemption, demonstrating that God's grace can be greater than our circumstances. The story of Rahab, like Tamar's, challenges human expectations. Rahab was a Canaanite prostitute who lived in Jericho, a city about to be destroyed by the people of Israel. However, her story is one of redemption and faith. When Israelite spies came to Jericho to scout the city, Rahab hid and protected them, risking her life to save them from the local authorities. Rahab had heard about the victories of the Israelites and their God, and in her heart, she decided to trust in him. Her faith led her to make a bold decision, an act that would not only save her life and her family's but also integrate her into the people of Israel. Rahab became a symbol of God's grace, showing that no matter who we are or where we come from, faith can change our story. After the fall of Jericho, Rahab and her family were spared, and she was received into the Israelite community. Years later, Rahab married an Israelite named Salmon, and they had a son named Boaz, who would be an ancestor of King David. Thus, the foreign prostitute who risked her life for her faith became a crucial link in the Messiah's bloodline. God showed that his grace knows no boundaries, and even those considered unworthy by society can be part of his redemptive plan. The story of Ruth is one of the most beautiful in the Bible, filled with loyalty, sacrifice, and divine providence. Ruth was not only a foreigner but also lived at a time when widowed women were extremely vulnerable. After the death of her husband, Ruth decided not to return to her homeland, Moab, but to stay with her mother-in-law, Naomi, in Israel and care for her. Ruth's faithfulness was not only an act of love toward Naomi but also a testimony of her faith in the God of Israel. This decision was a great act of courage, as, being a Moabite, Ruth not only risked poverty and rejection but was also challenging the social and cultural barriers of her time. Ruth chose to follow Naomi and adopted the God of Israel as her own, showing that redemption is open to all who are willing to walk in faith. In her new home in Bethlehem, Ruth found the kindness of a close relative, Boaz, who, following the Goel or Redeemer laws, took her as his wife. Together, they had a son named Obed, who would be the grandfather of David. Through this union, Ruth not only found a new life but also became a fundamental part of the genealogy of Jesus. Ruth's story reminds us that faithfulness and obedience to God can lead to unexpected blessings and that God can use the most unlikely individuals to fulfill his plan. Bathsheba is perhaps the most controversial figure in the genealogy of Jesus. Her story is intertwined with tragedy, sin, and redemption. Bathsheba was the wife of King David, but her story began with a violation of the law and a deep sin. David, at the height of his power, committed adultery with Bathsheba, who was married to Uriah, one of David's most loyal soldiers. After Uriah's death, which resulted from David's plot to conceal his sin, Bathsheba was taken as the king's wife. But God did not overlook this sin. Through the prophet Nathan, God confronted David about his adultery and murder. Although David's sin had serious consequences, including the death of the child Bathsheba had conceived, God's grace restored Bathsheba. She bore another son, Solomon, who would become the wisest king of Israel and the builder of the temple in Jerusalem. Bathsheba's story is a reminder that, while we may face the consequences of our mistakes, God's grace is sufficient to redeem us. God doesn't stop at tragedy but can bring beauty from the ashes and use even the darkest situations to fulfill his redemptive purpose. Finally, we come to the most well-known figure in the genealogy of Jesus, Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary lived in Nazareth, a small town in Galilee, and her life took an unexpected turn when the angel Gabriel appeared to her and announced that she would be the mother of the Savior of the world. Despite being young, humble, and not from a powerful family, Mary accepted God's will with faith and courage. At that moment, her life changed forever. Mary was a young woman of unwavering faith who, when called to be the mother of Jesus, didn't hesitate to accept God's plan, knowing the difficulties it would entail. Her life was marked by moments of deep joy, such as the birth of her son in Bethlehem, and moments of sorrow, such as when she witnessed the crucifixion of Jesus. Nevertheless, her faith and obedience to God never wavered. Mary's life shows us that humility, faith, and obedience are essential to being part of God's redemptive plan. Her inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus is a testimony that God chooses the humble and obedient to fulfill his great purposes. The stories of Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and Mary teach us that God doesn't limit himself to working only with those who have a perfect past or a privileged lineage. Through these women, we see that God has the power to transform our lives and use us for something much greater than ourselves. He does not stop at our past. On the contrary, he can take our weaknesses and turn them into a testimony of his grace. Each of these women showed faith, courage, and obedience, and their inclusion in the genealogy of Jesus reminds us that all of us, no matter our story, have a place in God's redemptive plan. May their lives and their faith inspire us to trust in his purpose for us, no matter the circumstances surrounding us. Have you ever felt like one of these women, incomplete or marked by your past? Have you ever felt incapable of being used by God because of your mistakes or struggles? Today is the day to remember that, regardless of your story, God can transform your life and use it for his glory. If the story of these women has touched your heart and you want to dive deeper into the truth that hides within each of them, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss more powerful stories of redemption and faith. Also, don't miss our next video, where we explore more about the power of God's grace in the lives of seemingly imperfect people. The link will appear on the screen right now. Click and keep growing in your faith. Thank you for joining us, and may the inspiration of these women in the genealogy of Jesus propel you to live a life full of faith, courage, and hope. See you in the next video.